Okay, in this part we'll be making the front bumper. Now to start this, let's just go into edit mode of that part of the black plastic material. Let me just turn on my stream keys. Okay, and select the bottom edge loop over here, and we'll deselect some vertices that are part of the inner wheel arch and the fender, just like this, and we'll duplicate them and then separate by selection. Then edit this new creation. We're going to extrude, just like this at a slight angle, and then slide those vertices to make them flat, and dissolve that edge loop right here. And then inside view, let's just move this on the y-axis, and we'll need to remove them from the shrink wrapped group. Shade the smooth, like this, perfect. And now I will just edit this so that we have a straight line when looking at it inside view, because right now it was kind of wobbly. Add loop cut here, just like that. Okay, let's assign the black plastic material. So remove the car paint, and it should assign itself automatically. Now, to have a better idea of the scale, we need to add a license plate. So, still using Blender Kit, like you can try to design your bumper right now, but I will just import a license plate from Blender Kit. So you can just type PL or license plate and whatever, and download the one you want. I have quite a bunch of them. It's mostly just to get an idea of the scale and like the amount of space we need to keep for it. So I'll just try to look up a nice one. That doesn't look too bad. Okay, so just position it. And since we're doing a concept, we're gonna cheat a tiny bit. And we can just place it here, but we can keep that to ourselves and scale it down just a tiny bit, just like that. Obviously, if you were making a real car, try to keep them as real size as possible. And even if you're making a concept, try to keep the proportions. Like, it's okay-ish to keep them, to rescale them, but not to modify their proportions if you want to go for realism. Now, select those 3 vertices after adding a loop cut there, and we'll just duplicate them and then move them down. So move this here and then extrude them down over here. Set your pivot to active element and then SZ0 to make them flat with the border right here and connect them together. Just like that. And now we'll move this a tiny bit. Move them until you're happy with the styling. Just like this. It's starting to look pretty good. I'll add a loop cut here. And another one right there. I want to have that angle a bit sharper, a bit steeper. All right, now I will extrude those vertices at the bottom. Same for that one here. Face that area and connect them to the bottom. Selecting those vertices, I'll just move them inward a tiny bit. You may have to recalculate the normals on yours if you have some weird appearance bugs. Okay, now let's select those 2 edges and face that area just like this. Don't worry too much about the license plate. We're going to be making a base mesh with this bumper to create a cutout. Just like that. Okay, let's just check the surface if it looks good, if the shape, and we can just experiment with different styles, just like this. So I'll try to preview some vent shapes and stuff like that by insetting faces, deleting some, and set your pivot back to bounding back center. And yeah, see if I can see an opening that could look good there. And yes, I think that could be fitting for the design. Keeping in mind that we will have a hole in the center for our license plate. So I'll just go back to where we were using Ctrl Z a bunch of times. Okay, let's add a loop cut here so that we have some extra geometry to play with, and make a bit of an angle here to try to preview some shapes, see if it's more interesting, with more attention drawn to the bottom of that bumper. Because that section will be lighter since we pulled it inward, then it will just add some contrast and light on that bottom part and draw attention of the viewer over there. Let's just shade this smooth. And yes, this looks quite good. Now, I'm not a fan of the lip that we had going on, so I will just move vertices around and then, so it's flatter, and then add a loop cut to make it sharper. Just like that. So we don't have a perfectly smooth end to that bumper. Now let's move this inward a bit. Same for here. And it's very important for you to check in cycles. So don't just check what mine looks like, but check yours as well, since it will give you a better view of your design and all that. So I added a loop cut here to make it sharper on the top as well. Check in camera views, check in orthographic, check in perspective. Let's move this in, try this. If you're happy with this, you can skip this part. I'm really just playing a bit with it. Don't skip the whole video. I'll come back to modeling in a few seconds. I'll just move this here, and we're now ready to turn this into our base mesh for the bumper. So selecting it, I'm going to go to the modifiers section, then bump up a subdivision to 4. I'll just turn off the solidify, just like that. Rename it to bumper, front bumper base mesh, or whatever. Then create a duplicate, hide the first version, reduce subdivision to 2, because you need to have always 2 levels or more between the two objects, I guess. Then assign all your vertices to the shrink wrap and set your target to the bumper base mesh and not to the car base mesh. Then what I'm gonna do is just go into edit mode, then select those two faces, delete them, add a loop cut at the bottom about here, and another at the top around there. Select those faces and delete them. So now we have a preview of what the holes will look like. Space this out a bit more and try to see what looks good to you. I'm gonna add loop cuts to tighten those corners, just like that. Okay, perfect. Now we're gonna scale this down even more. Now we're stretching a bit the limit here. So usually try to keep the size, especially if you're going for a real car, then you shouldn't have to do this. But yeah, I'm just doing this to make it look pretty. Alright, this is pretty good. I like that. So going back to the bumper base, not the base mesh, but just to the bumper. We'll select this loop here, then extrude it on the y-axis and remove it from the shrink wrapped parts. Let's just move this on the X so it has an angle like that. Add a loop cut here so it matches the number on the other side. You know what? Let's face this before and then add a loop cut so we don't have to play too much with it. I'll just make this flat over here. Okay, this is quite important to flatten it to the same level as the other one, especially if you're going to have a license plate that's mounted on it. You don't want it to be touching the bumper in some areas but not others. Let me just slide that over here, and same for this one. And face this area. Let's move this here so it has a slight angle. And add a loop cut to tighten this corner. Just like this. And now we have a big chubby hamster. Feel free to adjust the depth of it, the size, everything that may make it look better. So I'm just going to try different angles. Try to see if it looks better if I try to continue this kind of curve that we had with the bumper. Just like that. So yeah, pick the style that you prefer. I'll keep this one. Okay, now let's move on to this part. So add a loop cut here to tighten that corner, and we'll need to rework this, so make a bit of space there, and add a loop cut, slide this here, and we can just face this area. So now we gotta decide how we want our hole to look like. Okay, in wireframe, let's just cut a hole that looks about that size. Doesn't really matter. And we'll just select those faces and delete them. Actually, you know what? Let's just delete that. It's going to be much easier if we do it this way. So insert those faces a second time so that we have more geometry to work on, and then move them back slightly and remove that from the shrink wrapped part. Move this slightly more, then add a loop cut to tighten those edges and remove it from the shrink wrapped parts. And we should have this beautiful vent, or I don't know what you want to call it. Okay, let me try to tighten those corners just like that. See if it looks better. Alright, now select this loop over here. We'll extrude it. And then with this active pivot on the right side, I will just scale it to give it like a slight angle and try different stuff. You're not forced to do this. Obviously, do what you want and do what you think look good. I think it's important to try different things and experiment with many different designs and not just settle with what Blender gave you at first. Alright, let me rename this. Because now we need to add a loop cut to tighten this even more. And we can just place this closer to the bottom. Alright, so you can see it's not fully touching the back. So I will just move some vertices up until it meets with the plate. So going back here, let's just try with different materials. See if it looks good with all black fender. That's not too bad. I think some graphic element could fit like that. Some patterned material could look good. So yeah, let's just continue with this. Alright, now that the bumper is pretty much done, let's work on the skid plate or the protection plate that will go underneath the car. So selecting this, we'll duplicate, remove it from the shrink wrapped part. Then going back into edit mode, in the front view, we'll select the vertex on the side here, go back to side view and extrude it once, then another time until it goes well below the car. Let me just extrude this again until it meets with the mirror. Just like that, add a loop cut to tighten the corner. Let's now move it down a bit so it has an angle. Select those, dissolve some vertices over here, and then we're going to extrude the top one, just like that, to create a protective loop that runs across the edge. So with the bounding box as your pivot, you're going to extrude the rest so we can connect them perfectly together. Let me just move that here. Then try to match the angle between the two so it doesn't meet with the other one with such an awkward angle. Let's just shade this smooth. And then into front view, what you want to do is try to set up a little design here. So select that vertex and extrude it twice until it meets with the mirror. Then tighten that corner, add loop cut to match on the top. Let's move this a bit out so it catches more light. And selecting those will still just play with the angle until you're happy with it. Then we're going to extrude it back and slide this here so it has a slight angle with this. Let's just add another one here and very close to the other and fill this area, just like that. And recalculate the normals if needed. Shade the smooth and add loop cut to tighten it over here. Now selecting those three vertices, we're going to make the main plate, so extrude it a few times to match the number that you have on the side. And let's add another loop cut here and there to match. Let's just slide this here. And let's face up that region. So I want to have a sharp angle here, so I'm gonna add a loop cut. Here you want a loop that follows the contour of that emboss, I guess. And then we will need to add a loop cut there to match the rest. Now for this, let's dissolve this loop over here and face up that area, just like that. And we can add a loop cut here or just fill it like that. And that's our plate. We can play a bit more with the angle. I feel like it could be improved. So I'll just tuck it in. Selecting those faces to make the dent bigger, just like that. Okay, now for this part, I guess we can create some nice little extra details. So in setting those faces, I will just extrude them up. And we'll give it a basic steel material. So let's just bump the roughness of the chrome and duplicate it. Don't forget about that. To about 0.5. You can play with it if you feel like it. I'll just rename this to keep the... Okay, let's just rename this, and once you're happy with it, we're going to add a plane underneath the car and then move it up to the ground level and scale it so that we can see better what the car will look like once we have like a real environment, because the car will catch reflections both from the sky and the ground. So that's it for this part of the tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.